How do you explain the spiritual fruit reflected in Western Christianity? The miracles, the saints, the hospitals, the universities, the exorcisms. There's an entire Christian empire that exists outside of Eastern Orthodoxy that has transformed the world. How can we stand before Christ one day and give an account of simply rejecting that when he himself taught us the good fruit reveals a good tree? So, before you become Eastern Orthodox, ask yourself, can you make peace with this system? Can you look at your Protestant and Roman Catholic friends, parents, family members, previous experiences, and the entire last millennium from St. Anselm of Canterbury to Richard Wurmbrand and so forth, and say all of that, heresy, darkness, and falsehood? Can you do that? That's what you're converting to. Now, that's not what you'll hear a lot of times, but that's the history of it. Final comment is this. We who are Protestants don't need to return the favor. We can acknowledge there is salvation outside of just one institution, and therefore in these multiple institutions. That's a whole Protestant contribution to the church. Prior to the Protestant Reformation, except among the proto-Protestant groups like the Waldensians, you really didn't have that. It was not the historic Protestant position that the Eastern Orthodox were not a church or did not have salvation. Another thing people will say is, don't try to act like Protestantism is more ecumenical. I've had this experience, I've had that observation, I've seen how nasty it is out there in Protestantism. And I don't question people's experiences, but my point would be that's not official Protestant teaching. In fact, this was one of the whole appeals against Roman Catholicism at the time of the Reformation and for a while afterwards, is you Catholics are wrong to restrict salvation to those who submit to the Pope, because look over there at the Oriental Orthodox. Look over there at the Eastern Orthodox. They're Christians, so therefore you Catholics are wrong to restrict salvation to the Pope. That's sort of taken for granted today. That's even seeped into Eastern Orthodoxy in the 20th century, and certainly today. That's a Protestant influence. I know people will get mad, and I know they won't believe me, but it's true. If you just read in the 16th century, you read what the Eastern Orthodox said, you read what the Roman Catholics said, and you read what the Protestants said. And it's as very, very clear that it's only the final of those three groups that was saying the other side can be saved. Protestants have been the ones who bequeathed this to the world, that actually we can look over at each other amidst these deep divides, and we're not minimizing them, and say salvation can exist outside that. And that's only subsequently come in these other traditions. So that's one thing I'm grateful for about Protestantism. And that's one reason I would encourage people not to become Eastern Orthodox, because if you do, think about the implications of what you are saying about the rest of Christendom. Can you really live with that? Can you really stand before Christ and say that? I submitted to a system that required me to basically regard over 85% of the people who can recite the Apostles' Creed as just stuck in the darkness, and just to shun them, basically.